Fellowship of the Broken, Making Sense of 12-Step Recovery by Angelo. Chapter 49. Why it Works. We have now seen how the 12 steps bring about a spiritual awakening. This transformation is effective, guaranteed and ongoing, provided the steps are practiced diligently. The quality of recovery will be directly related to the extent of the practice of self-awareness, self-contemplation and self-forgetting. Many addicts try to get an adequate recovery through minimum effort, and the result will always be disappointment and frustration. The ingredients needed for effective recovery are honesty, open-mindedness and willingness. If one or more of these is missing, then we can always petition or pray for them. If we're not willing to pray, then we have not yet reached the necessary stage of brokenness. This level of brokenness will vary from individual to individual, but if we are not yet ready to concede that we are broken, then our life circumstances will inevitably get worse until we are ready. This is not theoretical scaremongering. This is what happens. As mentioned in the introduction, 12-step recovery works simply because it is a spiritual solution to a spiritual problem. It's often difficult for an addict to grasp that the damaging physical addictions and mental compulsions are really symptoms of an underlying dis-ease. This is why it's so important that the message of recovery is carried by those who really understand what it's like to suffer from addiction and who also know what needs to be done in order to recover. We have looked at aspects of addiction and have seen that it is a complex and multi-layered condition. There is the physical addiction, the mental compulsion, the deeper psychic issues, and the misidentification with the personal ego self. There's also the risk that abstinence will cause vulnerability to symptoms of grief and also cross-addiction. Early recovery is often emotionally painful and very challenging. The risk of relapse is high during the first few months of abstinence, and the addict needs a great deal of support to help them get through this period. Abstinence is necessary for recovery, but abstinence deals only with the first layer of physical addiction. The other layers also need to be addressed, otherwise there can be no sustained recovery. The combination of 12-step fellowship and 12-step recovery provides a powerful solution to all of the aspects of addiction. The root of the problem is spiritual, and so too is the solution. Prior to this, fellowship provides guidance and support during the early months of recovery. This help is multifaceted and includes a safe place to spend time, companionship, identification as an addict, motivation, advice on relapse prevention, practical support, emotional support, literature, an early understanding of the steps, service opportunities, a sense of belonging, and a social life. And there's also the positive vibrational effect of spending time in the company of honest, humble, loving fellows. After a period of attending 12-step recovery meetings, it becomes apparent and obvious that it will be a struggle to sustain recovery just by relying on fellowship. It is the 12-step program that will address the problems of mental compulsion and deeper psychic issues. It may be that additional professional help is required later to deal with the underlying mental issues, but the steps will certainly be a good start. Crucially, it's also the latter part of the 12-step program that will bring about the much-needed vital spiritual experience. There's no standard timing or stage for when this will happen, but the Step 9 promises indicate that something should have changed by then. Regular practice of steps 10, 11 and 12 will then continue the transformation towards letting go of the personal ego self and increasingly abiding as non-personal consciousness. It is this self-realization that will finally cut the root of addiction and provide the desired freedom. A sponsor facilitates the link between 12-step fellowship and the 12-step program. The idea of one addict working with another is foundational to 12-step recovery and can be seen as the third essential component in addition to fellowship and the steps. Addicts in recovery are best placed to carry the message of recovery to those seeking help, and likewise addicts who practice the 12 steps provide the best resource to guide others through the process. There's no formal training for a sponsor, although there are workshops available in some intergroups for those wishing to obtain additional guidance. Typically, a sponsor will base their approach on their own experience of being sponsored themselves. As a consequence, there is no standard approach to sponsorship. Each has their own style and preferences based on experience. Some expect strict adherence to suggestions, and others are more flexible. This is ideal given that each addict is unique and will react differently to different styles. The important thing is to find a sponsor who demonstrates the kind of recovery that we aspire to, and then to trust the guidance received. Once an addict is ready to work through the 12-step program, the first important step is simply to ask a member of the fellowship to sponsor them. The general advice is to select someone who is experienced in practicing the steps and who has a quality of recovery that we find desirable. Sound advice is to select someone with whom there is zero risk of intimate emotional entanglement. Other than this, there's no specific guidance. If the individual that we select is not available for any reason, then we simply select another. It's important to remember that sponsorship is not a burden on the sponsor. It is part of their own practice of step 12, and most addicts in recovery will be glad for the opportunity to share their experience. If the subsequent relationship does not work well, becomes stale or becomes logistically difficult, then it's not uncommon to change sponsors. The important thing is to keep up the momentum of working through the steps. Although there is no standard approach or style, a sponsor will typically offer help in all aspects of recovery. There will be specific suggestions concerning service and participation in fellowship meetings. There will be emotional support and guidance for particular personal problems. Time will be spent reading through literature on each of the steps in turn. Experience and understanding of each step will be shared. Typically, the sponsor will be the individual with whom we share our step 5, although this does not have to be the case. There will be guidance on the making of amends and encouragement to maintain the practices of steps 10, 11 and 12. And finally, the sponsor will be able to offer guidance and support when we ourselves have the eventual opportunity to sponsor others. The platform for recovery is therefore fellowship, sponsorship and the 12-step program. If this platform is embraced, together with the ingredients of honesty, open-mindedness and willingness, then the result will be transformational. This transformation is the solution to addiction, and it also touches every other aspect of our lives. This new freedom is the carrot that eventually replaces the stick of suffering. We have all of the tools needed to continue the journey all the way home. There's no doubt that 12-step recovery works if we work it. There's also the experience of those in Al-Anon who have found tremendous benefit in 12-step recovery, even though they are not addicts themselves. it can be seen that all human beings would benefit from working through a similar process in order to progress through to this second stage of life. This wisdom is perennial, yet somehow remains hidden from the majority, despite its ready availability in multiple guises. Given that 12-step recovery really does work, it begs the question as to why success rates are so low. For every addict that recovers, there are on average at least 9 others who not only fail to recover, but miss the opportunity to experience life as it truly can be. The solution is simple, but the reasons that we fail to grasp it are varied and complex. Each individual human being is unique, so it's not possible to offer a complete explanation, but there are some common traps and mistakes that can be usefully identified. Having now understood why 12-step recovery works, we can now use this explanation to gain an understanding as to why it does not currently work in the majority of cases. In many respects, the next chapter is the most important of all.